Okay, so I have completed the campaign and all the missions here. There's also additional stories here in the manual, so I thought I would just quickly go through those real quick in case anybody is interested. Since I did start the campaign off with reading these, I figure I might as well end it as well. So it's the Battle of Mestberg. Let me turn, just gotta zoom in a little bit because it's awful small text. So hold fast, men, easy does it. Shepke's growling voice carried easily on the crisp morning air. Keep those tapers away from the cannons a while yet, boys. We want 'em close, don't we? The grizzled veteran rubbed at the 3 days' growth of stubble on his chin and spat phlegmatically on the trampled wet grass. The grudge-briggers stood atop the rounded hillock, halberds ringing around the slope to make a defensive wall of sharp steel. Above them a contingent of wooden elves from Athelloren waited calmly, bows at the ready, their elegant pennants flapping in the steady breeze. Saradan, the enigmatic elf ranger, nodded almost imperceptibly at Shepke as he surveyed the ranks of the mercenaries. Atop the hill sat 2 cannons, squat iron war machines loaded and primed with grape shot for close quarters work. The gunners from Nuln paced around the cannons impatiently, taking care that their lighted tapers were not extinguished by the steady drizzle which ran in rivulets over the dull metal barrels of their beloved guns. The dwarf hammers in front of the cannons glared furiously in the direction of the enemy, apparently with no thought for the gaping black maws set to explode scant inches over their heavily bearded heads. They had worked with the gunners before and trusted them implicitly. The dwarves knew that there was no room for doubt in the battle to come. The hillocks sat in the middle of the valley, flanked by forested slopes of the mountains which rose on either side to create an impassable valley wall. To right and left similar hillocks rose, no doubt the careless deposits of the long-dead glaciers which had carved these troughs through the mountains in aeons gone by. On each of these hillocks the glitter of steel reflected what sunlight shone through the persistent curtain of thin rain. Bright banners looked strangely drab in the dull gray morning light, and intermittent blaring of horns trumpeted signals of redoubt. To redoubt? I don't know what that means. The ground between the hillocks was a mess of trenches and ditches, ranks of spiked wooden poles and noxious tar pits, rendering transit through the valley almost impassable. Engineers worked feverishly at the final preparations, and to the untrained eye, the array of troops and war machines looked very impressive indeed. Shepke had 20 years of hard-earned battle experience under his worn leather sword belt, and he was not impressed. He recognized the hurried construction of the defenses, the gaps in the earthworks, and the lack of any form of second-line defense. He recognized poorly trained mercenaries from Estelia in their flamboyant scarlet jackets, and knew that there was little to no command structure to this ragtag army. From his brief conversations with the Prince Moran Daviri, the lord of the minor principality, Shepke knew that he recognized the deficiencies too. They were, after all, obvious. The prince's regiments held the right flank, resplendent in blue and gold, but Shepke knew that only 1 man in 5 were trained, regular soldiery. The rest were farmers, millers, blacksmiths, and the like up until the scant few weeks ago. The grudge-bringers held the center ground, and with good reason. Their reputation went before them, as did that of Morgan Bernhard, their leader. Prince Daviri knew that whatever else happened, the mercenaries would follow their famous motto: the grudge-bringers will hold until paid their bloody gold. As he surveyed the battlefield, Shepke was pleased, and did not and not a little relieved to see Bernhard and his cavalry trotting briskly towards the hillock. The elite warriors were returning from a spoiling attack against the oncoming war host. While from a quick head count, Shepke could see no losses, although it looked as though Gunther Mack was slumped in the saddle of his Ronan. Bernhard waved cheerily as he approached, treading his way through the defenses as if he had put them there as if he had put them together himself. I see you have men arrayed in fine style, my friend, Bernhard shouted as the ranks of the Hellebergs parted to permit the cavalry to ascend the hillock. I see you've bloodied yourselves, my lord, answered Shepke, a broad grin on his face. Black orc blood, of course, if I'm not mistaken. Bernhard nodded and jumped from his saddle, handing the reins of his stallion to the young Kurt Valak as he did so. Nor are you wrong, Shepke, nor are you wrong. You should have seen us. We swept them aside like chaff before the wind. Grudgebringer roared and bellowed, and none could stand before us. Abruptly, Bernhard's eyes became downcast. Still they came, though. Still they come. Still they come, though. Still they come. Hark, their drums rattle and bash in my ears even now. I would say we have perhaps a half hour, and then they will be upon us. They have trolls, great gnarly beasts with ripping fang and claw. One of them did for Mac in a trice. I must find De Vere and warn him of their disposition. With that, Bernhard clambered back into the saddle and made to gallop away. He turned to Shepke and grinned fiercely. Raising his voice, he addressed his expectant troops with a voice of steel. We will earn our gold before the day is out, my friends. Mark my words, some of us will fall, but we all know the deal, don't we? He clearly expected an answer. The mercenaries knew what was demanded of them, crying out with one voice, "The gold of the dead is the gold in my purse." Bernhard nodded clearly pleased. Good, so be it. Can you not smell them? Do they not stink? The orc hosts of Urgot rip by approach. With brash words and crude weapons, they are no match for my grudge bringers, no match at all. He stretched out his arm and pointed down the valley. Every one of these evil scum is worth a copper piece to us, dead that is. So by my reckoning, that's enough greenskins on the way to keep us in ale for a few months. And this the men cheered heartily, although their faces betrayed the battle tension which Shepke knew so well. The tightening of his stomach and the bile rising as a cold lump in his throat, making him as no different from his men. Bernhard considered a moment before continuing. I'm away to see our gracious patron now, lads, to see if I can't arrange a fat bonus for us. Us being placed in such a splendid position here, right where the action is going to be thickest. At this, Shepke grinned, showing broken teeth. Thing is, my fine boys, Bernhard went on, old Rip-Eye has seen his way to sending maybe 100 orcs for each one of us, ogres and trolls too. So there's plenty of work for our swords today. With that, he turned his horse about and headed for where the prince could be found. I'll be back, he shouted as he cantered past Shepke. Passing his lieutenant, he leaned over on the saddle, a conspiratorial glint in his eyes. Shepke strained to catch the whispering words. I'm going to have to negotiate quickly now, Shepke, old man. De Vere said nothing about giants or wyverns, did he now? And with that, Bernhard was off down the hillside again, his war stallion kicking up great clods of earth as he headed for the prince's camp. Shepke shook back his head and laughed into the rain and wind. What else could he do when his lord appeared to look forward with eager anticipation to battle, a battle where it seemed that they would be outnumbered by a host of unspeakable beasts from the very gates of hell? Shepke laughed until grim tears ran down his grizzled face. As he laughed, the distant sound of orcish war drums and the dull stamp of thousands of iron-shod feet rolled around the rain-drenched valley. Stand easy, lads. We've time for a smoke yet. The lieutenant made such made much of casually rolling a fresh cheroot from his meager supply of tobacco before adding, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and it's a good gold piece for the first of you ragged lot to down a troll, so look sharpish." Alright, and then there's a second part here. I just gotta scroll because it's at the very end of the module here. So the Battle of Mesterberg Part 2. All around the hillock the grass was slick with mangled black and red blood. Bernhardt withdrew Grudgebringer, his sword, from the still twitching corpse of a goblin fanatic who had crushed into the ranks of his halberds, pulverizing them with immense metal ball on a length of rusted chain. Grudgebringer glittered and sparkled, white fire running along the edge of the blade, unsullied or untarnished by blood or gore. It seemed that they had reached an impasse in fighting. With the deaths of the fanatics, the foremost mass of night goblins had halted in dismay, arguing and bickering amongst themselves at the bottom of the hill. Behind them, the hulking shapes of orcs and worse approached, howling and snarling at their smaller cousins to get stuck in. A fury of black-fletched arrows washed against the ranks of the Grudgebringers, and the young Valak fell with his throat pierced, and his young blood staining his surcoat. The mercenaries had been forced to the very top knot of the hillock and formed a tight circle around the cannons. The elves had run out of arrows some hours ago, and were now fighting in close quarters, with their wicked blades standing alongside dwarf and man to close the gaps in the thinning ranks. The cannons themselves were loaded and ready, but once fired, there was no more tinder or shot left. Bernhardt knew that the last shots must count. The valley was full of orcs, a black, crawling mass whose stench reached up to assail his nostrils even whilst the fighting ebbed a while. More orcs than even Bernhardt had expected had assaulted their position nonstop for 5 hours or more, and the air was thick with the reek of them. For the first time he began to wonder if he would live to see another day. To Bernhardt's right stood Shepke, his motionless face giving nothing away. His armor was battered and dented, and blood ran freely down his left arm. Where an orcish blade had penetrated the shoulder joint of the armor, I assume that's supposed to say, Shepke still managed a weary grin, and gesticulating at the gobos below, he shouted to his men. See, they have no stomach for a fight when faced with real warriors. Turning to Bernhardt, he shouted again, this time at the goblins and orcs themselves. What are you waiting for, night filth? Come on up and taste Grudgebringer and meet your death. As he finished, Bernhardt held aloft a magical sword so all could see, and the burning fire along the blade caused the night goblins to wail and gibber, covering their eyes from the hated glare and backing away in confusion. Bernhardt had waited for his moment, and seized the chance eagerly, bringing his sword down in a sweeping gesture which gunners recognized at once. The two mighty cannons roared, and the air was full of fire and smoke as hot metal shards raked the night goblins into a mass of bloody sinew and chalk-white bone in an instant, tearing on into the tight press of orcs behind. As the smoke cleared, the great cheer went up from the human ranks, and other cannons began along the ragged defensive line fired in unison. Like a wave of blazing thunder, the sound of the cannonades went up and down the line, joined by the tearing rattle of the volley guns and the flash of the lightning as Uberstrom, the celestial wizard, unleashed his power on the orcish army. A dull green flickering witchlight answered, as some unseen shaman replied in kind, but it was too late. Confident of victory, the orc horde had seen its best ranks ripped asunder in a moment, and they began to waver in their determination to press home the attack. Mighty black orcs roared in anger and frustration, contemptuous of their cowardly kindred. Massive ogres pushed on, dim-witted dimwittedly perceiving that something was wrong, but driven on by blind momentum, tearing holes in the human line with massive clubs and mauls. They were few, but they were pulled down or riddled with arrows and musket fire. At that moment the unthinkable was happening. The orcs were teetering on the brink of a rout. Bernhardt recognized the fact immediately and knew that the orc war bosses would be doing their utmost to rally their forces, seize back the initiative, and clinch the defeat from the puny outnumbered humans. Even as he looked around and assessed the situation, a black shape as tall as a clock tower in nearby Mesterberg lurched forward, a horror of fang and claw, red eyes burning insanely as they peered down at the tiny human warriors. Without hesitation, Bernhardt leapt forward on his charger, raised Grudgebringer, and hurled forward to meet the lumbering troll head-on. It roared in bestial laughter and raised a mass of spike clubs upwards to deliver the death strike to yet another impudent manling. Defeat was unthinkable to this towering, mindless monstrosity whose tiny mind was a raging maelstrom of bloodlust and frenzied destruction. Shepke followed his leader, guessing what was in his mind, and Grudgebringer cavalry raised the standard and galloped heroically down the slope to meet the enemy 20 times their number. "Are we going to be shamed by manlings?" bellowed Fragman, and the remaining dwarfs joined the charge, quickly followed by halbers and wood elves alike. None knew what they were doing. All were certain that they faced death, but all would follow Morgan Bernhardt to hell and back if he asked them. Scant yards away, Bernhardt raised Grudgebringer once more and pointed the blade at the towering troll, who was almost upon him even now, leering wickedly as it reached down a thorny, clawed hand to pluck the leader of the Grudgebringers from his saddle. "Meat," it articulated with difficulty, corrosive saliva dripping from its gaping maw to fall hissing on the bloody ground. Greedy eyes peered at the wickering stallion, ignoring the little pinprick pointing at its head. The orcish ranks roared in primal laughter, eager to see the human warrior devoured by the raving troll. Then Grudgebringer erupted into blazing fury. A jet of incandescent energy engulfed the troll in a moment. Its head flew sizzling and popping through the air to land like a cannonball amongst the nearby Black Orc command group. Seeing their leader slain, if inadvertently, by one of their own, the orcs wavered uncertainly. The blazing sword filled them with dread. The charging cavalry regiment crashing into their front ranks decided them, and they broke and fled shamelessly before the humans who moments before they had thought beaten. The horse astride the still bubbling remains of the troll, Bernhardt laughed a harsh laugh and raised his sword to the skies. All along the lines the orcs were falling back in confusion and despair, and the weary human warriors were following up. Even the cheap Estalians, realizing that fierce attack was their only hope of survival. Don't give up. Don't give the fleeing bully a chance to look over his shoulder, and he might not realize what a small boy he is being chased by. Morgan Bernhardt laughed aloud as he shouted the words. He had seen it happen before and knew it could happen again. "Grudgebringer," he howled, "Grudgebringer," and the cry was taken up by the mercenaries, then throughout the whole pursuing army. A resounding single voice of determination and anger. Bernhardt knew then beyond a doubt that they would win and that he would be able to collect the 1 gold piece promised for the first troll killed that day. Alright, so that is the story. And it just dawned on me when I was reading about the magic and things that I had that Bright Wizard, and I don't think I ever freaking used him. And I think he had the ability to block movement too with one of his spells, so I could have used that to block movement. Maybe all three of those wizards together with the thorn bushes, then the whirlwind, and then maybe the firestorm, I probably could have stopped a lot of movement of the enemy units, and that may have actually made it quite a bit easier, but I never even thought about doing that until I was reading the story. So that's a little frustrating, but maybe your playthrough will be a little bit easier, and maybe you can try to do that strategy and let me know in the messages and comments if that's a thing, because I'm sure other people would like to know, because anything to help make the game easier, I'm sure would be greatly appreciated given how hard it is to get reinforcements. So with that, this game is now coming to a close. I hope you enjoyed these videos. If you did, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. And thanks again to the subscriber that purchased this game for the channel that we're able to see what it's all about. Have a great day.